Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody notices. In a world where appearances deceive and assumptions kill, what happens when a woman who endured years of mockery and dismissal suddenly reveals she possesses skills that could eliminate a threat from over a mile away? This is the true story of Sarah Mitchell, a woman who walked among us as a quiet librarian while carrying secrets that would shake the very foundation of everything people thought they knew about her. Her journey from ridicule to respect wasn't just about proving others wrong. It was about a hidden identity so extraordinary that when the truth finally emerged, it changed lives, saved a community, and revealed that sometimes the most ordinary-looking people carry the most extraordinary abilities. Sarah Mitchell pushed her glasses up her nose as she wheeled another cart of books through the narrow aisles of Millbrook Public Library. At 32, she had become as much a fixture in the small Colorado town as the old oak tree in the town square. Her brown hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were practical rather than fashionable, and her soft-spoken manner made her nearly invisible to most people who passed through the library doors. The whispers followed her wherever she went in town. At the grocery store, women would lean close to each other and murmur about how sad it was that someone her age had never married, never traveled, never done anything exciting with her life. At the local diner, men would chuckle quietly about the mousy librarian who probably had never been on a real date. The younger crowd was less subtle in their mockery, often making jokes about her thick glasses and outdated wardrobe when they thought she couldn't hear. Sarah heard everything. She always had exceptional hearing, along with other abilities that the people of Millbrook could never imagine, but she had learned long ago to let their words bounce off her like rain on a window. She had bigger concerns, deeper purposes, and a past that would have left these small-town gossips speechless if they had known even a fraction of it. The truth was that Sarah Mitchell had not always been a librarian in Colorado. The 8 years she had served as a Navy SEAL, one of only a handful of women to ever complete the grueling training and join the elite ranks of America's most deadly special operations forces. Her specialty had been long-range precision shooting, and she had been considered one of the best snipers in the entire military. Her confirmed kill count was classified, but it was enough to earn her 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and the respect of every operator who had ever worked alongside her. But that was a lifetime ago, before the mission that changed everything, before she decided to disappear into civilian life and find peace in the quiet corners of America. The transition had not been easy. Going from high-stakes operations where split-second decisions meant life or death, to checking out romance novels and organizing community reading programs felt like moving from one planet to another. The physical changes had been deliberate. She had traded her athletic build for a softer appearance, wearing loose clothing that hid her still impressive muscle tone. The thick glasses were real but stronger than necessary, a small deception that helped change the sharp, alert look in her eyes that had once been able to spot enemy movement from incredible distances. Her posture, once ramrod straight from years of military discipline, was now deliberately casual, even slightly slouched. Even her name was different. Sarah Mitchell was the identity she had built for her new life. Her real name, along with most details of her military service, was buried so deep in classified files that even she sometimes felt like that person had been someone else entirely. The hardest part was not the mockery or the loneliness, but the constant alertness she could never completely turn off. Even in the peaceful library, she found herself automatically noting exit points, potential threats, and defensive positions. When she walked through town, her eyes continuously scanned for anything out of place, any sign of danger that civilians would never notice. This hypervigilance had saved her life countless times in combat zones, but in Millbrook, it only served to remind her daily of how different she was from everyone around her. She lived in a world where people worried about missing their favorite television show or whether their lawn needed watering, while she had spent years where a moment of inattention could result in death. The isolation was profound. She had tried, in the early days after moving to Millbrook, to form friendships, maybe even romantic relationships. But how do you explain gaps in your personal history? How do you answer when someone asks what you did before becoming a librarian, or why you sometimes wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat? How do you share a beer and laugh about ordinary problems when you have seen things that would give most people nightmares for the rest of their lives? So Sarah had learned to be alone, to find comfort in books and routine, to build a life that was safe and predictable, even if it was also empty. She told herself it was better this way, that she had served her country and earned the right to a peaceful existence, even if that peace came at the cost of never being truly known by anyone. The library became her refuge. Between its walls, surrounded by thousands of stories, She found a kind of peace. She loved helping the elderly find large print mysteries, teaching children to love reading, and maintaining the quiet order that made the library a sanctuary for anyone seeking knowledge or escape. It was meaningful work, even if the rest of the town saw it as proof of her unremarkable life. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, as autumn painted the Colorado mountains in brilliant reds and golds, Sarah was processing returned books when she overheard a conversation that made her hands tighten involuntarily on the book she was holding. 3 teenage boys had commandeered a table near the back of the library, supposedly doing homework but actually spending most of their time trying to impress each other with increasingly crude jokes and stories. They were not bad kids, really, just young and thoughtless in the way that teenagers often are. But today their conversation had taken a turn that made Sarah's military training kick into high alert. "I'm telling you, my older brother knows guys who could get us anything we want," one of them was saying, his voice low but not low enough to escape Sarah's enhanced hearing. "Guns, explosives, whatever. He says there are people up in the mountains who have been stockpiling stuff for years. Come on, Tyler, your brother is full of it." Another boy responded, but there was interest in his voice, not dismissal. "No, seriously. He says they're planning something big. Something that will show this whole town that they're not just a bunch of crazy hermits. My brother says they're going to make a statement that nobody will ever forget." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. In her years of special operations, she had learned to recognize the signs of domestic terrorism. In its early stages, what these boys were describing sounded exactly like the kind of chatter that intelligence agencies monitored constantly, the casual conversations that sometimes preceded devastating attacks on innocent people. She forced herself to continue processing books, to maintain her cover as the harmless librarian, while her mind raced through possibilities and protocols. Were these just teenage boys repeating rumors and trying to sound important? Or were they unknowingly describing a real threat that was developing in the mountains surrounding their peaceful town? The boys continued their conversation for another 10 minutes before packing up their books and leaving. Sarah waited until they were gone, then quietly made her way to the computer terminal and began researching everything she could find about unusual activity in the local mountains. What she found made her blood run cold. Over the past 6 months, there had been a series of small incidents that individually seemed meaningless, but together painted a disturbing picture. Hikers had reported strange sounds echoing from remote areas, sounds that could have been construction or could have been weapons testing. Local gun stores had noted unusual bulk purchases of ammunition and supplies by men who paid in cash and gave false addresses. The county sheriff's office had received several reports of heavily loaded trucks moving through back roads at odd hours, but follow-up investigations had found nothing. By themselves, these incidents could be explained away. But Sarah's trained eye recognized the pattern immediately. Someone was building something in those mountains, something they wanted to keep secret, something that required weapons and explosives and careful planning. As the library closed that evening and Sarah locked the doors behind her, she found herself standing at a crossroads she had hoped never to face again. She had left her old life behind, built a new identity based on peace and anonymity. Getting involved would mean risking everything she had worked to build, potentially exposing herself and the carefully constructed life she had created. But she had also sworn an oath years ago to protect innocent people from those who would do them harm. That oath had not expired when she left the military, and she could not stand by and do nothing while a potential threat developed in her new home. That night, Sarah Mitchell, the librarian, went to sleep, but someone else entirely was already beginning to wake up, someone with skills and knowledge that the people of Millbrook would never expect from their quiet, unremarkable library worker. The transformation would not be immediate, but it had begun, and once started, there would be no going back. The question was no longer whether she would act, but how much of her true self she was willing to reveal in order to protect the town that had never seen her as anything more than a spinster librarian who spent her days surrounded by books. 3 days after overhearing the teenagers' conversation, Sarah had made her decision. She would investigate the mountain activity herself, but she would do it carefully, methodically, and without revealing her true capabilities unless absolutely necessary. Years of special operations had taught her that the best intelligence often came from patience and observation rather than dramatic action. Her first step was to re-establish contact with certain resources from her past life. Late that night, from her modest apartment above the town's flower shop, Sarah accessed encrypted communication channels she had not used in over 3 years. The responses came quickly, confirming what she had suspected about recent federal intelligence chatter. The Department of Homeland Security had been monitoring increased activity among domestic extremist groups throughout the Rocky Mountain region. Several known militants had dropped off the radar in recent months, their last confirmed locations all within a 50-mile radius of Millbrook. The FBI had flagged unusual financial transactions and equipment purchases, but they lacked specific intelligence about location and timing. What the federal agencies did not have was someone on the ground, someone who could move through the local community without suspicion while gathering the close-range intelligence needed to prevent what was increasingly looking like a planned attack. Sarah realized that her position as the invisible librarian might be the perfect cover for exactly the kind of operation that was needed. Her second step was to begin systematically observing the people in town, looking for anyone who might have connections to the mountain groups or knowledge of their plans. This required her to emerge slightly from the shell she had built around herself, to actually engage with the community in ways she had previously avoided. She volunteered to help with the annual Harvest Festival Planning Committee, a role that put her in contact with most of the town's business owners and long-term residents. She began staying after library closing hours to host book clubs and community meetings, creating opportunities to listen to conversations and observe behavior patterns. She even accepted an invitation to join the local hiking club, despite the irony of a group of weekend adventurers trying to teach mountain navigation to someone who had conducted covert operations in some of the world's most challenging terrain. The mockery followed her into these new activities, of course. At the festival planning meetings, she overheard women speculating that she was finally trying to find a husband before it was too late. The hiking club members made gentle but patronizing jokes about hoping she could keep up, clearly expecting her to be the weak link who would need constant help and slow everyone down. Sarah endured it all with the same quiet patience she had always shown. But now she was listening with a different purpose. She was mapping social connections, identifying who spoke with whom, noting which conversations stopped when she approached and which people seemed nervous or evasive when certain topics arose. Her training in behavioral analysis, honed through years of interrogation work and threat assessment, allowed her to spot subtle signs that others missed entirely. She noticed that Frank Morrison, who owned the hardware store, had been making unusual bulk purchases of fertilizer and fuel, far more than his customer base could justify. She observed that several men who claimed to be construction workers were buying supplies, but none of them had the calloused hands or practical knowledge that real contractors possessed. Most significantly, she identified at least 3 individuals whose stories about their backgrounds did not hold up under casual questioning. The hiking club proved to be particularly valuable for intelligence gathering. During weekend excursions into the mountains, Sarah was able to map the terrain while appearing to struggle with the basic hiking that was actually effortless for her. She deliberately fell behind the group, claiming to need frequent rests, which allowed her to conduct surveillance without arousing suspicion. On one of these excursions, she found what she was looking for. While the rest of the group was eating lunch at a scenic overlook, Sarah had slipped away under the pretense of finding a private place to relieve herself. Instead, she had climbed to a higher vantage point and used the small but powerful binoculars she had hidden in her backpack. From that elevated position, she could see into a valley that was not visible from any of the regular hiking trails. What she saw there made her blood run cold. Someone had constructed a substantial camp, with multiple buildings, training areas, and what appeared to be weapons storage facilities. Through her binoculars, she could count at least 15 people moving around the compound, all of them armed, all of them displaying the kind of tactical discipline that suggested serious military training. Most disturbing of all, she could see that they were conducting what appeared to be rehearsals for some kind of assault. Groups of men were practicing coordinated movements, breaching techniques, and rapid deployment scenarios. Whatever they were planning, it was sophisticated, well-organized, and designed for maximum impact. Sarah made her way back to the hiking group before she was missed, but her mind was racing through implications and tactical assessments. This was no longer a matter of suspicious activity or potential threats. This was an active terrorist cell in the final stages of planning an attack, and they were doing it less than 20 miles from a town full of innocent people who had no idea they were in danger. That night, she established emergency contact with her old commanding officer, a man who now worked in a classified capacity for the Pentagon. The conversation was brief and conducted through secure channels, but the message was clear. Federal resources were tied up in other operations, and it would be at least 2 weeks before a proper response team could be deployed to the Colorado mountains. 2 weeks might be too late. From what she had observed, the terrorist group appeared to be in their final preparation phase. Their rehearsals suggested they were close to implementing whatever plan they had developed, and Sarah's experience told her that waiting for official help might mean allowing innocent people to die while bureaucrats argued about jurisdiction and protocols. She found herself facing the decision she had hoped never to confront, whether to break her cover and act independently, knowing that doing so would end forever the peaceful life she had built in Millbrook. The answer came to her 3 days later, during what should have been an ordinary Tuesday at the library. Tyler, the teenager whose conversation had first alerted her to the mountain activity, approached her desk with a strange expression on his face. He looked nervous, almost frightened, very different from his usual cocky demeanor. "Miss Mitchell," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "I need to tell you something, and I don't know who else to talk to." Sarah looked up from her work, maintaining her usual mild, helpful expression, while every nerve in her body went on high alert. "What's troubling you?" "It's about my brother and those guys he's been hanging around with," Tyler continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think they're planning to hurt people. I mean, really hurt people. And I think it's going to happen soon." For the next 20 minutes, Tyler told her everything he had learned from eavesdropping on his older brother's conversations. The picture he painted was even worse than Sarah's worst fears. The group in the mountains was not just planning an attack, they were planning to hit multiple targets simultaneously, including the elementary school, the town hall, and the annual harvest festival that would bring together nearly the entire population of Millbrook in one vulnerable location. The attack was scheduled for the following weekend, during the festival's main day, when families would be gathered in the town square, when children would be playing games and eating cotton candy, when elderly residents would be sitting together sharing stories and enjoying what they thought was just another peaceful community celebration. As Tyler finished his story, Sarah realized that she was looking at a choice between two different kinds of death. She could maintain her cover, wait for federal help that might not arrive in time, and potentially watch hundreds of innocent people die while she stood by as a helpless librarian. Or she could reveal her true capabilities, take action that might save lives, and accept that in doing so she would be ending forever the quiet, anonymous existence that had become her refuge from a violent past. The choice was not really a choice at all. That evening, after the library closed, Sarah Mitchell began to transform herself back into the person she had once been. She retrieved equipment from carefully hidden locations throughout her apartment, gear that she had hoped never to need again. She cleaned and assembled weapons that had not been touched in years. She reviewed tactical plans and contingency strategies, her mind automatically shifting into the focused, analytical mode that had once made her one of the military's most effective operators. But this time would be different. This time, she would not be part of a team, would not have backup or support, or extraction plans. This time, she would be acting alone, using skills that a town full of people could never imagine she possessed, protecting people who had spent years mocking and dismissing her without ever suspecting that their lives might one day depend on the quiet librarian they had always considered irrelevant. As she prepared for what might be her final operation, Sarah found herself thinking not about the gratitude or recognition she might receive if she succeeded, but about the children who came to story time every Thursday afternoon, about the elderly veterans who spent their mornings reading newspapers in the library's comfortable chairs, about the young mothers who brought their babies to the weekly parenting group. These people had never seen her as anything special, but she had come to care about them in a way that surprised her. They represented the ordinary, peaceful life that she had fought to protect during her military service, the normal world that justified all the sacrifices that people like her had made in darker places. Tomorrow she would begin to show them who she really was. But tonight, she simply sat in her quiet apartment, surrounded by weapons and tactical gear, and tried to remember what it felt like to be someone whose greatest concern was whether the new shipment of books would arrive on schedule. By morning, that person would be gone forever, and in her place would stand someone that Millbrook had never seen before. A woman with the skills to kill from impossible distances, the knowledge to outthink and outmaneuver trained terrorists, and the determination to protect innocent people even if it cost her everything she had built in her new life. The Harvest Festival dawned bright and crisp, with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made Millbrook look like a postcard. Families began arriving at the town square early, setting up booths and decorating for what everyone expected to be another peaceful celebration. Children ran between the preparations, their laughter echoing off the surrounding mountains, while adults chatted about ordinary concerns like who would win the pie baking contest and whether the weather would hold for the evening dance. None of them knew that 3 miles away, in a concealed position that offered a clear view of the entire town square, Sarah Mitchell lay prone behind a rifle that could put a bullet through a target the size of a coin from over a mile away. She had been in position since before dawn, having hiked through terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers, carrying equipment that weighed more than most of the festival goers could lift. Through her scope, she could see the town coming to life below her. She watched familiar faces setting up their annual traditions, people she had checked out books to for 3 years, people who had never imagined that their quiet librarian was now their only protection against what was about to unfold. Her intelligence gathering over the past week had confirmed Tyler's worst fears. The terrorist group planned to strike at 2 p.m., when the festival would be at peak attendance. They would hit from multiple directions simultaneously, trapping the crowd in the town square and maximizing casualties before any effective response could be organized. Their plan was brutally simple and devastatingly effective. But they had made one crucial mistake in their planning. They had never considered that someone with Sarah's capabilities might be watching, waiting, and ready to turn their carefully orchestrated attack into a nightmare for the attackers themselves. At 1:30 p.m., Sarah spotted the first team moving into position. 4 men with assault rifles, using the tree line on the north side of town as cover, exactly where her reconnaissance had suggested they would appear. Through her scope, she could see their faces clearly enough to recognize 2 of them from federal watch lists she had accessed through her classified contacts. At 1:45 p.m., the second team appeared on the west side, and the third emerged from concealment near the old mining road. 15 men total, all heavily armed, all moving with the kind of tactical precision that confirmed they were not amateur militants, but serious operators with real training and experience. At 1:50 p.m., Sarah acquired her first target, the team leader on the north side, a man whose intelligence file indicated he was responsible for 3 previous domestic terrorism attacks, including one that had killed a family of 4. Through her scope, she could see him speaking into a radio, coordinating the final approach with his fellow attackers. At 1:55 p.m., she took her first shot. The sound echoed through the mountains like thunder, a sharp crack that made every person in the town square look up in confusion. Most of them assumed it was someone hunting out of season, maybe a poacher taking advantage of the noise and distraction of the festival. None of them realized they had just heard the sound that saved their lives. The terrorist leader dropped where he stood, killed instantly by a shot that had traveled over 2,000 yards with perfect accuracy. His team froze in shock, looking around frantically for the source of the shot. But Sarah's position was invisible from their angle, and too distant for them to identify even if they had known where to look. Before they could recover from their confusion, Sarah had already shifted to her second target, a sniper from the west team, who was positioning himself to fire into the crowd. The second shot came 12 seconds after the first, and another attacker fell, his weapon clattering uselessly to the ground. Now the remaining terrorists understood they were under attack, but they could not see their enemy, could not return fire, could not even determine the direction from which death was reaching out to claim them. Some of them tried to retreat, but Sarah had positioned herself to cover all their escape routes. Others attempted to proceed with their original plan, thinking they could complete their attack before the unseen sniper could stop them all. They were wrong. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah systematically dismantled the terrorist attack, with a display of marksmanship that was almost supernatural in its precision. She took shots that military snipers train their entire careers to attempt, hitting moving targets at extreme range, compensating for wind and elevation changes that would challenge even the most advanced ballistics computers. One by one, the attackers fell. Some tried to use trees and rocks for cover, but Sarah had mapped every inch of the terrain and knew exactly where to place her shots to reach them, regardless of their defensive positions. Others attempted to coordinate a response, but she eliminated their communications personnel first, leaving the survivors confused and isolated. In the town square below, people were beginning to realize something unusual was happening. The repeated gunshots from the mountains were too frequent and too precise to be casual hunting, and several of the older veterans in the crowd recognized the distinctive sound of high-powered rifle fire. Sheriff Thompson, a decent man, but one whose experience was limited to handling domestic disputes and occasional drunk driving cases, was trying to organize an evacuation while radioing frantically for backup that would not arrive for at least 30 minutes. It was Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who ran the town's historical society, who first spotted something that made her blood freeze. She had been looking through her husband's old binoculars, trying to see what was happening in the mountains, when she caught sight of armed figures moving through the forest surrounding the town. "Sheriff!" she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "There are men with guns coming down from all directions. They're surrounding us." The panic that swept through the crowd was immediate and terrifying. Parents grabbed their children, elderly residents struggled to move toward their cars, and the organized evacuation that Sheriff Thompson had been trying to coordinate dissolved into chaos. People were trapped in the middle of an attack they did not understand, facing enemies they could not see, with no clear escape route and no way to defend themselves. From her position in the mountains, Sarah could see everything unfolding below her. She could see the fear on faces she recognized, could see children crying as their parents carried them towards safety that might not exist, could see elderly people falling behind as younger families rushed past them. The town that had mocked her for years was now completely dependent on her for survival, and they did not even know she was there. But there were too many targets and not enough time. Despite her incredible accuracy and the devastating impact she was having on the terrorist attack, several of the attackers had managed to reach positions where they could begin firing into the crowd. Sarah could hear the sharp crack of assault rifles below her, could see people in the square diving for cover behind the flimsy festival booths that offered no real protection. This was the moment when Sarah Mitchell, small-town librarian, had to completely disappear so that someone else could take her place. She abandoned her concealed position and began moving rapidly down the mountain, carrying her rifle and additional equipment, using skills she had not employed in years to traverse terrain that would be impossible for most people. As she moved, she continued to take shots at any terrorists she could see. But now she was mobile, dynamic, using the mountains themselves as her battlefield. She leaped across ravines that would challenge professional rock climbers, slid down slopes covered in loose scree that could kill someone with a single misstep, and maintained perfect accuracy with her rifle while moving at speeds that defied belief. The remaining terrorists, those who had not yet been eliminated, found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. An enemy who could apparently be everywhere at once, who could hit them from angles that should have been impossible, who moved through their chosen battlefield like she owned it. 25 minutes after the first shot, Sarah reached the outskirts of town. There were still 3 attackers alive, pinned down behind various forms of cover, but still dangerous to the civilians who were trying to flee. This was when the people of Millbrook got their first look at who their quiet librarian really was. She appeared at the edge of the town square like something out of an action movie, moving with a fluid grace that made her seem almost superhuman. Her glasses were gone, revealing eyes that burned with focused intensity. Her usual loose clothing had been replaced by tactical gear that showcased a physique built for combat. The rifle in her hands was aimed and fired with mechanical precision, and her third shot took down another terrorist before most people even realized she was there. "Sarah?" Sheriff Thompson called out in disbelief. "Sarah Mitchell, is that you?" She did not answer immediately, too focused on identifying and eliminating the remaining threats. Her fourth shot dropped the terrorist who had been using the bandstand for cover. Her fifth and sixth shots, fired in rapid succession, eliminated the final 2 attackers who had been trying to flank the crowd from behind the hardware store. Only when the last threat was neutralized did she lower her rifle and turn to face the crowd of people who were staring at her in absolute shock. "Everyone needs to stay calm and move toward the school building," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made people automatically obey. "There may be additional threats in the area, and we need to establish a secure perimeter until backup arrives." For several seconds, nobody moved. They simply stared at this transformed version of the woman they thought they knew, trying to reconcile the deadly efficient operator they had just witnessed with the quiet, unremarkable librarian they had ignored for years. It was little Emma Thompson, the sheriff's 6-year-old daughter, who broke the spell. She pulled away from her father and ran directly to Sarah, wrapping her arms around the woman's legs in a fierce hug. "Thank you for protecting us," Emma said simply, looking up with the kind of trust that only children possess. In that moment, the crowd seemed to understand what had just happened. The woman they had mocked, dismissed, and overlooked for 3 years had just saved their lives with skills they never could have imagined she possessed. She had been their guardian angel all along, hiding in plain sight, ready to step forward when they needed protection they could not provide for themselves. The questions would come later, along with the federal investigators and the media attention, and the complete transformation of Sarah's quiet life in Millbrook. But for now, she simply looked down at the little girl hugging her legs, then up at the faces of people she had come to care about despite their treatment of her, and realized that some secrets were worth revealing when the people you protect are worth protecting. "Is everyone safe?" she asked Sheriff Thompson, who was still staring at her like he was seeing a ghost. "Thanks to you," he replied quietly. "But who are you really, Sarah? Because you're definitely not just a librarian. BM, BT, BP." Sarah Mitchell looked around at the town that had become her home, at the people who would now see her completely differently, at the life she had built that could never be the same again. Then she smiled slightly, the first genuine smile many of them had ever seen from her. "I'm exactly who I've always been," she said. "I'm just someone who believes that good people deserve to be safe, and I happen to have the skills to make sure they stay that way." The mockery was over. The quiet librarian was gone. But in her place stood someone who had proven that the most extraordinary people sometimes come in the most ordinary packages, and that underestimating someone can be the most dangerous mistake you ever make.